Well, good morning. Good morning, all. How is everybody? You're doing as well as me. I was speaking to my pastor, Josh, up in our church on the Sunshine Coast at Anthem recently, and I was getting some advice and some sagely, worldly wisdom from him on, his tips, I guess, on giving a Sunday message, and speaking to a congregation on a Sunday morning, and he said, Ineka, it's really important when you deliver that Sunday message, the goal is really to speak from a place of rest. So I'm here in my beanbag. How am I doing so far? No, I thought really what an amazingly symbolic way to, I guess, really introduce a talk on rest is to be in this ridiculously oversized, insanely comfortable beanbag. This is our personal beanbag at home. We have a couple of these, and it's funny, we have 3 very comfortable functional lounges in various rooms of our house, but for some reason, I know the reason, is this is where everyone gravitates to in the house. We have these two beanbags like this, and they're waterproof as well, so they actually go in the pool, so it's kind of cool. So these are, amazing. But I'm not going to give the whole talk from you, in case you're wondering, is she really? I don't even know if it's ever been done to give a whole, Sunday message from a beanbag, but I'm going to get out before I fall asleep and start drooling on myself as gracefully as I can. That's been a lot of practice. But really, I guess we're talking about rest today, and what better symbol of rest really is there? I think it's almost a scientific fact that, it's impossible not to feel restful and relaxed when you're sitting in a beanbag, or a hammock like this. Perhaps you're at home and you're literally lying in a beanbag or a very comfy lounge now, or you've ducked into the next room to go and grab that beanbag that you might have lying around the house, and maybe you're sitting there comfortably right now in that beanbag, but I encourage it. And today we're going to talk about being in that beanbag a little bit more, whether it's metaphorically or literally. Why do we want to talk about rest? Rethinking rest. Why is it important? I feel like society today and life generally, Marcia mentioned this idea of, how our buckets are just full. Life is busy, right? And, we're talking about alpha and the importance of alpha and reprioritizing. Our buckets are really full of stuff. And I think life in general and society in general is really geared towards this busyness, borderline bonkers sometimes. Life is busy. Who here would say that their life is pretty hectic? They're in a fairly hectic season of life right now. Right, perhaps you're like me and my husband. We have a young family. We have 2 young kids, Preppy, she's 5, just turned 5, and a 9-year-old. We both work full time. I run my own business consulting. I work for several national not-for-profit organisations in my consulting, sort of medical and scientific and research consulting for a lot of children with terminal illnesses and brain disorders and so on. My husband runs his business. He's in transport and construction, so he's got his own small business. Sometimes we even see each other. It's really great. We have the busy school schedules, birthday parties. My family's not here today because my daughter has a horse riding party for one of her best friends. So as I was leaving the house this morning, Dad was busy doing glitter and hair and this mermaid out. There's so much tulle. It was, I don't know how she's going to ride a horse, but this idea of, school sport, after school activities, weekend sport, volunteer commitments, family and friends, of course, we need to put those back up the top of the list. But life is just really, really hectic. And that's the season of life we're in. Perhaps you're equally busy, but in a different season at the moment. Perhaps you're at school or university, or you're studying for some sort of degree or diploma or qualification. Perhaps you're starting a new career, or you're investing in a new business or trying to build a business. Perhaps you work in the community and serving others. Now I have so much respect for people that do that. That takes so much of you physically, mentally, and spiritually to be able to work in the community, serving others. Perhaps you're caring for a loved one. I think it doesn't really need any explanation. Life is busy. Life can be hectic, and we all have in some way lots of commitments and lots of demands on our time. And I believe, unfortunately, society sort of rewards and puts on a pedestal those people that, can be the super mums and the super dads and these men and women who can juggle all of the things and do them well. And we live in this busy world and society that really merits, this ability to multitask and to do things bigger and better and quicker and faster. And I think that's really, we're a society that hardly stops to draw breath. And technology really has, a lot to do with this. I think it's a double-edged sword, and I'm extremely grateful for technology. For example, we have families right now in Australia and, across the world that can tune in and watch this live stream and watch the playback. During COVID particularly, technology was a wonderful gift that enabled us to stay connected. But smartphones, this technology, but particularly smartphones, have pretty much guaranteed that we are available to our family and friends, to our work colleagues, to complete random strangers all over the world, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we have right in the palm of our hands with our smartphones this information and input. Every minute of every day we have input. We have this overload of information, notifications and, bells and dings and pings and whistles and red flags and all sorts of things coming in on our phone. If we don't put healthy boundaries up, we really have this constant input into our lives. And this sort of adds to this sense of chaos and frenetic life, that we live in, the society that we live in. I saw this the other day and I thought, that's quite perfect for this little talk this morning. Oh, helps if I turn it on. That we got, we're so addicted to our phones, we're so absorbed in the busyness of our life that we don't really see much going on around us if we don't put up those healthy boundaries. And this idea of technology, I was telling Donna before the talk, I go into high schools a lot recently and talking about the dangers of technology, helping children, kids and teenagers understand how their brains work and the importance of rest and the importance of sleep and diet and exercise and how that ties in with learning. But this idea that technology is really, it's quite addictive, and it's one of the things, science and sort of all the literature is pointing to the fact that our obsession with smartphones and devices is actually leading to this sort of epidemic of stress and anxiety. So what did technology do? What did the marvels of the IT industry do? They invented an app to help you de-stress because you're on your phone so much. Look at this. You can tap your stress away, which is actually the thing that's causing the stress in the first place. But I thought, that's just so ironic, isn't it? But really, the point I guess is whether you love technology or, regardless of what you think about technology, life is demanding, right? Even without technology, life is demanding. And sometimes life is just downright messy. And someone in the interview mentioned that today, I think it was you as well, Marcia, that life can be really messy. And it's full of challenges and trials and complicated things that we all have to navigate. And that's actually not a bad thing in and of itself. I think that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes life interesting, is we have all these different facets and all these different things that we constantly, juggling. And God made it that way, that we could have the capacity and the ability to give and to participate and engage and relate in the world. But it has to be done with healthy boundaries. So that's actually, how we look at things makes all the difference. And when I was here last year, we talked quite a bit about that, how we have the capacity in our brains and our minds to unwire certain thought patterns and rewire new ones. We can renew our mind by changing the way we think and by changing the way we look at things. And I think that's really where I want to get to today, to talk about the fact that during the storms of life and the challenges and the really messy, crappy parts of life, I think Mel and Hudson were talking about that. I think you guys talking about the challenges and how how you face these storms in life and how you find that rest and that peace that you were talking about, Hudson. I loved your interview, that you find that way to just still be still and be at peace with God amidst the challenges, not when you don't have challenges in your life, because that's kind of unavoidable. We all have, families, we all have relationships, we all have, jobs or health problems or people that close to us with health problems. There's always something going on in your life, and the trick is really to stop and change our perspective on those challenges and those trials and tribulations through life, and find rest within them, not without them. We need to find rest with them in our lives. James 1, the first verse of the book of James: "Consider it a pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when we face trials of many kinds, because the testing of your faith produces perseverance, and perseverance finishes its work so that we become mature and complete and not lacking anything." That actually, today I want to talk about finding rest in that place where we need to persevere, even in your very busiest, messiest days, and even in the darkest valleys. Because as we know, God walks through the valleys with us. He doesn't say, you go through the valley, I'm just going to be over here waiting for you on the other side. He goes through it with us. And we want to talk about how do we get to that vanilla of life, I call it, where we're walking through the storms and through the valleys, but we're still in a place of rest in the beanbag of our life. So you see, working through the demands and challenges of our life, like I said, is inevitable and unavoidable. We have to go through them, but the need to stop and rest amidst it is also absolutely unavoidable. We need to take rest. God designed us to need and take rest. Let that sink in for a minute. God designed us to need and take rest. Even in the middle of the storm, in fact, especially in the middle of the storm, where your instinct might be to kick like mad and keep afloat and keep your head above water, it seems counterintuitive to stop in the middle of that storm and actually just be still. But actually, when we can learn to do that, that's where we really will flourish. So it's not a luxury. Today I want to take you on this journey of rest and get you rethinking the whole concept, because you see, good and proper rest, restorative rest, is not a luxury reserved for a privileged few that can sit, in a beanbag, a luxury floating beanbag, or in a hammock in some tropical island with a pina colada in hand. It's not a luxury, it's actually a critical necessity. And God mandates us to rest, and He's designed us that we should best flourish when we've taken rest in that sort of literal or metaphorical beanbag. So to step into the best version of ourselves where we flourish is really where we want to be. We don't want to be living from a place of exhaustion and chaos and this sort of frenetic. So I want to talk to you today about rethinking rest in the body, mind, and spirit. So these three things, and I like to weave, so my last talk very much was about, brain, mind, and faith, brain, mind, and spirit as well, that these three things are so inextricably interwoven and they complement each other. And we're going to focus on each of these in turn today and how it relates to rest. So I think the first one being body, I think that's the most obvious thing to talk about with rest, is that physical rest. Then there's the rest of the mind that we'll talk about. And we know the scientific literature and the medical literature says that resting the mind is not just good for your mental health, so it decreases depression and anxiety and increases your cognition and your memory, but it's actually also the place, when you're in that state of mental rest, it's actually the place where you have your most innovative, creative thinking and ideas. And we'll talk a bit about that, and there's some really cool science around that. But most of all, being able to rest spiritually, is really, I guess, the paramount, the rest of the spirit. Being able to rest in God and to abide in Him, and for Him to abide in you is paramount to our spiritual health. And this is what I call, like I said, the vanilla of life. No matter what's going on and what the storms, that you're able to reach that place of rest. And it can only come from an intimate connection with God and a knowledge of who God is. So we'll talk about the biology of rest first, and then we'll take a deep dive into what the Word says. What does the Bible say about rest? What does God say about rest? And there's two parts to this. We're going to talk about resting from work, and what that means to actually stop and rest from work. And then this really key principle, this biblical and scientific principle of resting in work and how we do it, spiritually, mentally, and physically. So let's talk a little bit about rest. The biology of rest. Why do we rest? Well, I want to talk a little bit about sleep first. That seems to be, the most sort of logical place to start. Clinical guidelines recommend, does anyone know off the top of their head what the average adult, recommended 8 hours is for the average adult. Recommended 8 quality hours of sleep a night. So these are the international clinical guidelines. That's a whopping 1/3 of our life spent sleeping, which seems like a terribly unproductive and inefficient way to live, right? But we as humans haven't found a way to circumvent that. We still need 8 hours of sleep. This is just the way we've been created and designed. Alarmingly, however, we are an exceedingly sleep-deprived nation. Back in 2019, the federal government released a report called the Sleep Health Awareness Inquiry. It's a particularly droll read. I don't recommend it, as most government inquiry papers are, but I think the success of the paper probably lies in the fact that it's a marvellous cure for insomnia, so that if you read the first couple of paragraphs, you'll be snoring like a freight train by paragraph 2, I promise, so you're welcome. But I think seriously, the results of the sleep inquiry have shown that an estimated 2 in 5 Australians are not receiving adequate sleep and not getting their adequate sleep, and that the financial cost of the economy is purported to be over $26.2 billion per year in loss of workplace productivity and strain on the healthcare system and so on. Indeed, lack of sleep is incredibly toxic to our human bodies, to our design. The medical field has long known that long-term sleep deprivation leads to things like cardiovascular disease, depletion of the immune system, metabolic disorders like obesity and diabetes, depression, anxiety, cognitive decline, dementia, which is my field of expertise, is in dementia research. Lack of sleep and dementia are very closely linked, and the list goes on. Then there's shift work, which is, notoriously disruptive to sleep patterns and circadian rhythms and so on. That because of its effects on long-term sleep and inducing long-term sleep deprivation, the World Health Organization has actually now classified shift work as a probable carcinogen. That's the effect that lack of sleep can have on our bodies. So why is it necessary? Why is sleep necessary? Why, at the biological level, why do we need sleep? Well, you might be interested to know that even though we do an awful lot of it, and science has been studying it literally for thousands of years, we actually know relatively little about the biological mechanisms and what happens, beneath the bonnet and through your body at the cellular and molecular level when we're asleep. We just know that our life depends on it. Our existence depends on it. But what we do know from a brain perspective, as being a neuroscientist, I'll talk specifically about the brain, is that sleep is vital to the way our neurons communicate with each other. So you might remember last time I was here, if you'd seen the talk here or online, that that neurons communicate through a little process called neurochemical or electrochemical signaling. You have 100 billion neurons in your brain, and these connect up to 7,000 other neurons. So you have literally hundreds of trillions of connections going on inside your neurons, your brain cells of your brain, and they communicate through all these patterns, and they wire and fire together, and they synchronize. When they fire, they synchronize, and this is just an image of 2 neurons basically connecting across this gap known as the synapse, and they're passing chemicals along and they're communicating. Sleep is really important for learning and memory, right? And there's 3 steps to learning something. Let's talk about, say, learning a new skill or learning some new information. The first step that all 3 of these steps require sleep. The first one is the acquisition of information, so that when you're learning something new, you're learning something new right now. When you're hearing this information for the first time, your neurons are firing in synchrony, and all these synapses are talking to each other. If you haven't had adequate sleep, then your neurons are not going to be firing as optimally as the person sitting next to you who may have had their requisite 8 hours of sleep, and they're firing much more in synchrony, and they're absorbing and forming connections in those pathways more efficiently than someone that's sleep deprived. Secondly, there's consolidation of that information. So during those deep hours of slumber, during those 8 hours of sleep at night, something really incredible happens. Your brain actually, while you're in those deep phases, the slow wave part of your sleep, that really deep phase, your brain is actually refiring the same pathways that happen during the day in your awake state, and it's almost reliving that information such that each time that information's passed along the synapses are getting strengthened, like little bridges. They get connected and they get strengthened. So your brain is kind of reliving that information to consolidate it. This is what happens when you're having quality sleep. And it also then gets shuttled from short-term memory down into long-term memory for later retrieval. So this is all part of the consolidation. And then you have the recall part of that information, because there's no point having it locked away in a vault if you can't actually recall it, because technically you haven't learned anything and you haven't, there's no memory of that learning. So you need to be able to recall that information. And again, you need really good firing and wiring and synchronizing of those neurons. Again, sleep deprivation prevents that firing and that wiring and that synchrony of those neurons. So sleep is essential to learning and memory, and it's why when we're tired and we haven't had the requisite 8 hours of sleep a night, that we actually we're very vague and we're forgetful, and we think, oh, what's that person's name, or we're just that little bit vague and we can't think quite clearly. So sleep is essential for this. One enticing little discovery as well, and this is something I guess I worked right down to that DNA and molecular level in my work in the research lab, is that sleep is essential. There's something really cool happens at that molecular level, at that DNA level. You might be familiar with the double helix. This is an image on the screen of the double helix of DNA. When we're asleep at night, and this was only discovered in the last year or two, that when we're in that deepest phase of our sleep, you can think about your neurons and your DNA, so right down into the nucleus, your DNA, which has all the information for your cells for life, for making proteins and all sorts of things. During the day, when there's lots of cellular activity, your 100 billion neurons are firing and wiring, and there's lots of activity going on, the DNA actually accumulates little sort of potholes and blips and little mistakes in that DNA throughout the course of the day. But when you go into your deepest phase of sleep, these little molecular road workers come out when the traffic is gone, and they start patching and filling the potholes and fixing all those glitches in the DNA. And this only happens during those deepest phases of your sleep. So you're actually literally restoring your biology and restoring the cellular mechanisms in your brain and in your body when you're in that deep phase of sleep. So you're starting to get a little bit of an inkling on why at the biological level rest and sleep is so important. I like to give just, little tips, I guess. I want you to walk away with some practical tips and skills, and some little gems of information from my talks that you can apply. Tips for quality sleep, and I think this is, like we said, 2 in 5 people are technically and by definition sleep deprived. So that's probably, this group of people over here, if you think about the numbers in this room. I'm going to put my hand up as well for that. But things like a regular sleep schedule, so helping your body get into those natural circadian rhythms you might have heard about, because your body releases hormones and releases neurochemicals, so brain chemicals, to help you get into that sleep pattern. So you're feeling, by about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, you're feeling optimally tired, that you could go to bed and have that nice sleep, 8 hours of sleep. So these are the cycles that you're sort of forcing by keeping a regular sleep schedule, waking up at the same time, going to bed at the same time, exercising regularly, so you're making your body tired in a good way. You're releasing serotonin, which is this very, it's the feel-good, relaxing neurochemical in the brain. Avoiding excess caffeine and nicotine, that's sort of, I guess, an obvious one. Generally after midday, I would say no caffeine, or, switch to your caffeine-free teas and things in the afternoon. And nicotine, if you do happen to smoke or vape, I don't recommend that in general, but nicotine is really, very disruptive to sleep. And then relaxing before bed. There's sort of this whole concept of sleep hygiene in neuroscience, and in medical terms, I guess, we call it sleep hygiene, that relaxing before bed, things like herbal teas and warm baths and reading, creating an atmosphere. So you're avoiding bright lights and loud sounds. You know, what's the one thing we do when we've been sitting relaxing before bed and we come up to brush our teeth and go to the toilet before bed and we flick on the stadium lights in the bathroom? You know, try and have a dimmer if you can keep it dim, you know, like nice, because what happens is light, particularly from screens and technology, if you have teenagers and you tell them try and stay off your screen before bed and in bed, they'll probably just laugh at you. But it does actually emit the blue wave of light is what releases, which stops the melatonin from being released. So it actually stops the chemicals we need to get into that sleep phase. The blue light of the screen actually stops that by looking at, you know, these bright blue lights. So we try and avoid that sort of thing. And then resting the mind. So what is the number one disruptor to sleep, really? We go, resting the mind. One of the greatest, I guess, disruptors and for sleep disturbance is an overactive mind. A mind that cannot rest or switch off. A mind that pores over the problems and the challenges and the complexities of the day. You know, a restless mind. A restless mind. Learning to rest your mind and just to be still and to switch off mentally and have that mental downtime is an essential skill for many reasons, and it's actually one that the Bible talks of often. But before we move on to what God has to say about rest, I just want to quickly look at the science of resting the mind. So the science, there's a burgeoning body of scientific and medical evidence that suggests that rest, so that's mindfulness rest, not being in a sleep state, but during that wakeful part of the day where you're still awake, but you're resting the mind through meditation and mental stillness, or switching your focus to activities that require less sort of cognitive, complex processing. So the sort of the, you know, mundane tasks that don't require much mental exertion, that actually helps to build mental health, overall health, and also our mental productivity. So meditation, prayer and mindfulness, which, you know, where we intentionally shut off that mental busyness, is linked to decreased incidence of depression, decreased anxiety, dementia, and a host of other stress-related disorders like hypertension and cardiac disease and so on. But we see that it leads to memory improvement in dementia as well. Last time I was here, we spent quite a bit of time talking about prayer and the brain and the powerful ways in which the brain is activated in certain ways and deactivated in other ways, and we get this beautiful balance of all the various structures within the brain switching off and on, and we find this beautiful peace, state of peace and rest when we're in mental rest, when we're in that state of prayer. I highly recommend, you know, having a look at that, not just necessarily looking at my talk, but reading up on the power of prayer in the brain, because it really is, and it will really bring home this importance of this mental rest and how prayer is one of the most powerful weapons we have against mental restlessness. But fascinatingly, science also shows that mental downtime and mental idleness is where we actually sort of coast in neutral. So you're not thinking about anything in particular, we're coasting in neutral. It increases productivity, it replenishes attention, solidifies memory, and like I said before, it actually encourages your most innovative ideas and your sort of these pioneering aha light bulb moments. I'll give you an example. So, you know, if you've ever been chatting with somebody, chatting with a friend, and there's lots going on, you're talking about lots of different things, and you've got lots of different mental processes going on at once, and someone says, "Oh, have you seen that movie? You know, the one with such and such?" You're like, what's the name of that movie again? Oh, what's the name of that movie? Or what's the name of that guy that we saw the other day? And you're trying to remember that name, but you've kind of got this cerebral congestion. There's just so much going on. And it's not until later on in the day when you're doing something really mundane, like you're washing the dishes or folding the washing or washing your hair, and you have that, that's right. And there's actually a scientific explanation to this. Something happens when you're not mentally, you're just idle, you're just coasting along in neutral sort of thing. Something happens. We call it, offline consolidation. So you can think about it like the funnel being filled up. So during your busyness of the day, you've got all this information going in. It's just input, input, input. If you weren't to stop, so if you're filling the funnel with oil, like on the other side of the screen, you can see it's like information and bits of data and things going in. If you didn't stop to let that filter through, you're going to have it spilling over and make a big old mess. And the brain is no different. This is exactly the same way that it works. We need this time of what we call offline consolidation. And neuroscience always gives everything a very technical name, but it's basically just switching your mind off. Offline consolidation effectively gives your brain that time to process and pigeonhole and filter through all of that information. There's another fancy part of the brain, another fancy term, that it's called your default mode network, your DMN, or your do mostly nothing network, which means what happens is it's anything but a silent, quiet process in the brain. What happens when you go from consciously thinking about something, maybe you're learning, you've had a busy day on the phone, you're trying to schedule 50 different activities for your kids, and there's a lot going on. When you switch off and you just go and you sit and you make yourself a cup of tea, or you sit in your beanbag, or you start folding washing and you're switching off from all of the other stuff, the default mode network switches on. And it's this unconscious network where all the different compartments of the brain start talking to each other unconsciously, subconsciously. They're all connecting to each other. And they're actually processing that information unconsciously without you being aware. And it's really, really important, particularly if you're a student of anything and you're studying, or you're going through a really, cognitively technical part of your day with work or whatever it is that you do with your day. When you stop, make sure that I always study, my workspaces and my study spaces have always been by the window with some sort of view. At the moment I have a rock water feature outside my office window where I work from at home, because I know that every hour or so I like to look up and I like to look out the window, and I'll just concentrate on the water falling down. Or if you've got a view of the trees, just watch the wind blowing in the trees or the rain falling. And actually, in those moments where you're switching offline and you're going offline, the stuff that you've just been shoving into your brain matter for the last hour is actually being compartmentalised, and it's being pigeonholed. And it's a really, really important thing. I like to call it spending time in the beanbag of your mind. So this is just a little practical tip, I guess, to take away with you. So physical rest and mental rest are two really important things. So I think it's quite an amazing thing that, being still in the mind, again, it's a bit counterintuitive. Being still in the mind and resting in the mind is actually where we flourish, where we have our most productive aha moments. I know my pastor, Josh, in our church, we were talking about this the other day, and he's like, oh my gosh, that's so true. He said, the best message ideas that I get for our congregation, for our church, is when I'm mowing the lawns. And he's like, and I have these, and I've got to stop, and I've got to quickly put it into, he does this speech to text thing. I've got to put it into my phone because your phone's always with you, right? Because we like to tap. And he says, that's where he gets his best ideas. Or when he's out walking the dogs, he gets these ideas. Things just seem to compartmentalise, and he has those aha moments. It's so wonderful to think that this is where we bear fruit and where we have, some of our most productive ideas and industrious and creative ideas is when we're in this state of rest. Because like I said, God created us to be in this state of rest. So what does God say about rest? Well, let's have a little look now. So this last part of the talk is really going to hone in on some of the scriptures. And I guess this is where I take such delight, where my two worlds come colliding in the best possible way. And I time and time again, I get so excited about the way science and faith really reconcile. When you look, it doesn't matter what the topic, when I look through and read through the Bible with my neuroscientific lens, in this instance, it's on the subject of rest and meditation. It's everywhere through the Bible. And you're actually seeing, gosh, the science is really only just catching up with what God already knew. Yes, we're designed to need rest, and we're designed to take rest, and look what happens at the biological level when we do. So God wants us to rest from work, right? He mandates that. He desires that for us, and he mandates that. And I think the most obvious example here is the Sabbath. So the Sunday, the day of rest. By the seventh day, this is in Genesis 2, by the seventh day, God had finished the work he'd been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested. Now, if the creator of the heavens and earth and the creator of the universe needs to stop and rest, then I would take a fair bet that you probably need to stop and rest too, that you need it just as much as he did. So then, this is Hebrews 4. So then there remains a Sabbath rest for people of God. This is a very practical thing. It's not just spiritual rest. He's talking about physical rest here. There remains a Sabbath rest for people of God, for whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works, as God did from his. Let us strive to enter that rest. Who are we not to take rest? Who are we to think that we're so busy and so important and we've got so many demands on us that we don't have time to stop and rest? Because God did. But then there's the idea of resting before work, which is a little bit upside down in the upside down kingdom. Has anyone heard of that phrase, the upside down kingdom, where the king becomes the servant? And this is really when Jesus came to earth, it was this upside down kingdom that he tried to create. Kingdom on heaven on earth. This sort of flips things on its head. And what we see is that in the beginning, God created the heavens. This is Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. He was hovering. I sort of get this sense of brooding before that first, the first sort of spark of creation, the first seed and plant life, that God was hovering over the waters. He's resting. Maybe he's in his default mode network and he's thinking about what he's going to do. And what greater light bulb moment has there been in all of history than creation itself? So he's resting before the work of bringing, the plant life and the animal life onto earth. And Adam rested. Adam rested before the work. I get this sense that God creates the earth, he creates all of the things in it, and then he needs somebody to co-labor with him on earth. I get the sense that by the time Adam has been, God breathed life into his nostrils, and by the time Adam came to be on earth, he already had all the animals, he had all of the plant life, he had all of the food that he needed. But he couldn't find a suitable helper for Adam. So he sends Adam into a deep sleep, takes a rib and makes woman. You see how all the best things happen when you've had a good night's sleep? So he takes and he breathes life into Adam. So before Adam even starts co-laboring in the garden with Eve and with God, he's had this rest. He's had this time of rest. And above all, Jesus rested, right? What more? Who of us could say we're busier than Jesus? Jesus rested. Of course he did. Although he was fully God, he was also fully man. He was fully human, and he suffered the same human condition as you or I. When you read through the Bible, he suffered exhaustion. He suffered pain and anguish and tiredness and suffering the way we do. But Jesus set boundaries on his time, knowing that the importance of rest, and he often took time out. Through the Bible, we see him getting away from the busyness and the extraordinary demands upon one man. We see him taking time out in the desert to take rest, leaving his disciples to go up the mountainside to pray. Even as important as the demands on him were, you think about it, he was teaching and preaching, he was healing, he was casting out demons, and he was guiding the multitudes, but he still took time out to rest because rest was just as important. One of my favourite verses in the Bible is from the book of Mark. One of my favourite chapters, I should say, in stories, is where the disciples are in the boat with Jesus. So in the lead up to this particular passage, we see he's had an extraordinary busy day. They're on the Sea of Galilee. He has hundreds, if not thousands of people now following him and his disciples. And he's gone from town to town, and people are just wanting to be near him, just to touch his robes and be healed, just to hear him speak and just be close to him. And he's healing, he's casting out demons, that sort of first 3 chapters of Mark, we're really seeing, in all of the Gospels, we're seeing how much work he's doing. And he gets to this point where he says to the disciples, just take me out into the boat because people are crowding him on the shores. He wants to get off the banks and stand back so that he can see everybody. He's teaching. And then on that day, in the evening, when it had come, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side now." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. And there were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, this storm, this massive storm, and the waves were breaking over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. It was nearly sinking. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. Maybe he was in a beanbag. He's sleeping on a cushion, and the disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" I mean, here he is in the middle of a storm, sleeping, man. I mean, he must have been exhausted, right? But what happens next in this passage of scripture is the clincher to being able to rest in work. The difference between resting from work, which is what we're seeing Jesus do right now. He's resting from his work. He's regenerating and restoring himself so that he can go and teach and preach again the next day. But what happens now? He got up and he rebuked the wind and he said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And the wind died down and it was completely calm. And he turns to his disciples. I just think about this moment, I get all goosebumpy. He says, "Why are you still afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And that's my question to you. Do you have no faith? If you can't rest and you're finding yourself completely consumed by the storms and the challenges and the busyness of life, do you have no faith that God's not got your back? You can sleep in the middle of a storm. You can rest in the middle of a storm because God wants you to. God needs you to, because you need to be able to sleep. And this neatly ties in. Being able to rest in work is all a matter of perspective and having the right mindset. You have to have faith and trust that God is on your side in order to rest. You have to have faith. Yes, the saying goes, you have to have faith to take risks. But I think you have to have more faith to take rest in the middle of a storm. And oftentimes taking rest in the middle of a storm is actually the biggest act of faith that you'll ever make. It's really that simple. You'll never reach a place of rest and true peace in your mind and spirit if you don't first learn how to let go and let God. And we can learn so much from Jesus' example. Here is a man who truly lived from a place of rest. When I read the Bible, I don't get this idea that Jesus was running, frenetically from one thing to another. Yes, he had lots going on, but I always get this feeling of, that he went deliberately and peacefully and, from one place to the next. He never rushed. He was calm. And he waited patiently on God before he even began his ministry, somewhere around the age of 30. He waited patiently on God. And on the boat amidst the storm, when everyone else is shouting and fretting for their life, he rested in every sense. And this is a true picture of faith. And I think the picture that God wants for us, that no matter, you think about that metaphorical storm, you can rest and you can sleep and you can still know that God, trust in God that he's got this. He's not going to let that boat sink because Jesus still had work to do. Jesus still had God-ordained work to do. And so do you. You have God-ordained work to do. And he's not going to let your boat sink. He's not going to let you be taken off in a storm. He's there in it with you. So take faith and heed that he is there with you through that storm. He says, "For we who have believed enter that rest," in Hebrews. So there's a difference between trying to trust, because you're still grappling, there's still that tension when you're trying to trust God and you're trying to convince yourself. But what an amazing transformation, and you feel it in yourself, you feel that shift, that transformation when you go from trying to trust and reading your Bible and going, yes, I know all of these things, to then going, oh, he's got this. And then you enter that transformational rest, like you guys saying, it's almost like this revelation that God is there, and you get that goosebump moment, and God is there and he's in it with you, and you can rest no matter what's going on. And like I said, it's a mindset. How you approach those challenges in your life is up to you. And if you remember the last time we spoke, is that actually God gives you that free will to think and have the perspective that you choose. He doesn't force you to think a certain way. He's given you that capacity to wire and rewire. We're not hardwired. He hasn't created us to be hardwired because he wants to give us choice. That's a definition of true love. He doesn't force us into anything. He invites us and he draws us, but ultimately we get to choose how we think and we get to choose the perspectives that we have. So I would challenge you to look at the challenges in your life as gifts, and that they're honing and shaping your character, and that God is with you, holding your hand. And if he's not holding your hand, walking alongside you through it, he's actually carrying you. He's carrying you through it. You know that famous poem, The Footsteps? You know, the footsteps on the beach, and where through the difficult times. Does anyone seen that and know what it is? Yeah, that was a really pivotal poem, I guess, for me as a teenager reading that. That's something that really resonated with me in my faith journey, and that, for me, I always have a copy of it in my wallet on a little card, that through those most challenging times, there's only one set of footprints, and you ask God, I don't understand why, when the times were so difficult and the challenges were so hard for me, why there's only one set of footsteps. I don't know why you left me in those challenging times. And he says, my child, I would never leave you. It was during those times that I was carrying you. And that's the rest. You're resting in his arms. And I'm a scientist, right? So my livelihood depends on evidence. So I would say, when you go through the Bible and have a look at what the Word says about his promises for you and his love for you and his unconditional love for you, he says, I will never leave or forsake you. I will give you hope and a future. You can cast your anxieties upon me because I care for you. The battle is not yours, but mine, says God. For if I am with you, who could be against you? His love for you surpasses all knowledge and understanding. He is your parent, he's your creator, and he will never let you down. I mean, I could go on and on of these verses, just you're in a place, the storms are, that you might be in the biggest storm of your life right now. You might be in the biggest, most hectic, challenging part of your, chapter of your life right now. But I hope that you don't wait for the storm to pass before you actually go and take rest. I want you to take this message today and walk out of here and feel the peace that God wants you to feel. And if you're saying to yourself, gosh, and you're wondering, well, I can't afford to take half an hour out of my day. I can't afford to take a week off a year, or a week off a month, or a week off here, or 2 or 3 weeks here. If you think you can't afford it, I'm going to challenge you and say, do you think you can't afford not resting? Can you afford not resting? I think resting is the most important. I really didn't articulate that very well, did I? But I don't think you can afford to not rest, is the point that I'm trying to make. So I don't know, team, if you guys want to come up, and we'll land this message now. And if there's anybody here today that feels the need to pray with us, we'll have a team down the front that we want to pray with you, and we want you to feel that peace, and feel that peace in the storm. Not waiting for after the storm, but to feel that peace in the storm, setting aside to just be in the presence of God. And like I said, if this is that really challenging time of your life right now, or you've just been through it, or maybe, we don't know what's coming from one day to the next. But even when you feel exhausted and tired, and I'll use the example of one of the organisations that I work for in my medical and scientific capacity, is with the parents of these terminally ill children. And they have a very serious brain disorder. It's terminal. Most of these children won't live past the age of 10 to 12. And you have a look online, we've got lots of family groups on Facebook and things where they support each other, these families support each other. And the amount of faith and trust in God and the way they support each other, that God's got this and we're going to be okay, that if you're in a challenge like that, it's so humbling and so inspiring. And I look at this every day and I just think, wow, I mean, what could be harder than facing that every day of your life, waking up and seeing your child and watching them basically just degenerate and die in front of you. And these people still are so full of joy and so full of hope, and they can really find that place of rest. And I think that for me is, this idea where you are finding that place of rest, and that the Lord is your sustenance. So I just want to leave that there. I'll ask the team to play when you guys are ready. And if you have any requests for prayer or just want to come down and be still with us here at the front, I'll be here, the team will be here, and we just want to pray with you and be still and just know together that He is God.